Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to modify the sketch geometry. In the previous videos, we created the sketch geometries, and that's what we have to do before we apply a modeling action, before we apply a 3D part. And we created lines, arcs, rectangles, circles. We created different shapes. We dimensioned them. We used parameters. We're going to talk about them in the future as well. In this video, we're going to modify them. Sometimes we create the 2D geometry, we create the 2D sketch, and before we apply the modeling action, we want to modify these lines and rectangles and circles. And sometimes we apply the modeling action, we create the 3D part, and we realize that we need to modify something, we need to change the part a little bit. We can go back to the 2D sketch and modify the sketch geometry. And to explain what I'm talking about better, let's create a 2D geometry here, 2D sketch here on XY plane. And notice that on the top section in the sketch menu, you have the modify buttons available. Again, if you keep your mouse on them, you will see a quick preview of these options. So let's create a random 2-point rectangle starting from the origin point, let's say something like this. Now notice that we have a horizontal line here, horizontal line here. We have a vertical line here, vertical line here. As you know, if I want to delete this horizontal line, I can just select it and I can hit delete button on my keyboard and the entire line is deleted. Let's undo that and bring that line back. But if I click on trim and if I click on the line, before I click it, I can see that this dotted line appears, which means that it is going to trim that line. And when I click it, it deletes the whole line. So what's the difference between them? The difference is boundaries. With a delete button on your keyboard, it doesn't care about any boundaries. It deletes the line entirely. But with trim, it cares about the boundaries that the geometry you are deleting is in between. So for example, in this case, this horizontal line is between two boundaries. The limiting geometry on the left is this vertical line, and the other limiting geometry on the right is this vertical line. So it trims everything in between. To explain what I'm talking about better, let's create a vertical line here. Now this vertical line and this horizontal line intersects here. So if I click on this line and delete, again, it deletes the entire line. Let's undo that and bring that line back. But if I trim, now it cares about the nearest boundaries. It doesn't care about the whole line. So it deletes the section of that line between this vertical line here on the left and the vertical line here on the right. So now I can even trim this section and delete the other side of the horizontal line as well. Or let's undo that. Now I can click on trim. For example, if I want to trim this vertical line, it doesn't delete the entire line. It deletes this bottom section of it, or I can click on trim again, and I can delete the top section of it. Why is that? Because now the inventor is recognizing this horizontal line as the boundary in between. I have that boundary here, so the user might want to delete only the top section, might want to trim the top section. So let's undo and go back to the rectangle we had initially. Let's draw a line horizontally here. Notice that again, if I click on trim, it's going to delete this entire line because these are the boundaries. Let's undo that. But if I select trim and come to the vertical line on the right, now it doesn't delete the entire line. It deletes this section here because Inventor realizes that there's this horizontal line which the user might want to use as a reference, as a boundary. So now it kind of like acts like this is all the way extended to this vertical line, and now it only deletes this section of the line, vertical line, for the top side. Now I can just delete this side as well. Let's do the same thing with a circle. So now if I draw a circle here, let's move it a little bit to this side. Now if I want to trim the circle, select trim option in the modify menu. Now it recognizes these boundaries of the rectangle. So we have this vertical line here, and we have this horizontal line on the top. Now it realizes that this section of the circle is between those boundaries. So the user might want to delete that part. So now I can just trim the circle like this. Or if I undo that, I can trim the outer section of the circle as well. Or I can use the circle as my boundaries and I can trim the rectangle Now, it just used the sketch geometry that I created, which is the circle, and it used that as a boundary, as the limiting geometry to trim the rectangle. Similarly, let's click OK and get out of that command, and let's delete this circle. Similarly, you can use extend in the opposite way. So if I have a line in between here, and let's say I deleted this section. For whatever reason, I designed something like this, and I want to just close this geometry, and I can use extend for it. Now, as the extend option activated, I can just hover on this line. Now this line is going to look for the next boundary to extend this line to. Now, the next boundary is the line on the left, vertical line. So if I click on this, it extends this line all the way to the next limiting geometry. Again, I can do the same thing with the extend function active. I can just come here and this vertical line will be extended until it meets that next limiting geometry, which is the horizontal line on the bottom side of the rectangle. Again, let's do the same thing. Let's delete this entire line with the delete button on my keyboard. Let's draw a circle. Let's say for whatever reason, this internal section of the circle was trimmed. Now I want to put it back. And if I want to extend, now it also extends that circle consistent with the existing geometry, because the existing geometry is the circle, right? And now the limiting geometries are the horizontal line of the rectangle and vertical line of the rectangle. So it completes the geometry between those boundaries. And I can use the boundaries in an opposite fashion. For example, I can use the circle as my limiting geometry. For example, if I want to trim the rectangle using the circle as my boundaries, I can trim this side of the rectangle and this side of the rectangle, and I can just modify the sketch like that. So these are the trim and extend features in Autodesk Inventor. And also, we have the offset feature, which I want to talk about in this video. Let's undo and go back to the initial rectangle design. Let's say I want to, well, maybe we delete this too, and we draw a circle in the origin point. So now I want this circle to be 6 millimeter in diameter. And I want to draw another circle in between, and I want this to be 4 millimeter in diameter. Now I want to finish the sketch and extrude that. Now it looks like a tube, some kind of a fitting. Uh, but notice that to create this part, I had to create another circle manually, and I had to dimension that. And I might want to use the offset feature to save time. So let's just go look at it. Okay, so let's delete this internal circle again. And instead of just creating another circle, I can use the offset function available to me in the modification tool modify menu. I can offset this and say it is 2 millimeter away from the second one. Sorry, not the 2 millimeter away from the second one, but 1 millimeter away from the second one. That way, 1 millimeter here, 1 millimeter here. So the internal diameter, circle diameter is going to be 4 millimeter. Now I can finish that sketch, and then I can go back to the extrusion, and I can just select that side. And again, the same geometry is created. You might say that this is not necessary. Why would I use that? Well, if the geometry is more complicated, creating every sketch geometry manually can be pretty time consuming. So let's create a sketch. Let's this time create something similar with a rectangle. So I want to dimension this, say 40 millimeters. I want this one is 30 millimeters. And I want to create another rectangle here in between, and I want this to be 10 millimeter away, this to be 10 millimeter away, and then I want this to be so kind of between them. And I want to create another one 10 millimeter away and 10 millimeter away. Now notice that this geometry is created. I can apply the modeling action, let's say 50 millimeter long. I created this geometry, but notice that I had to create the rectangle manually and I had to dimension multiple lines, which is time consuming. So let's delete this and use the offset feature to do it in shorter time. Now let's create the rectangle again. What was that? It was like a 40 millimeter by 30 millimeter. So now I want to use the offset feature. I can just select that and say 5 millimeters. Sorry, 5 millimeters. That is just going to create the offset rectangle inside that initial rectangle geometry. So now I can finish the sketch and apply the extrusion, and the same geometry, same model is created with less clicks and less time. So again, you can do the same thing with the circles, or we can do the same thing with lines and arcs, and you can do the same thing with the other sketch geometries. But the important part here is we can create the geometries with the create functions here, lines, circles, arcs, rectangles, and then as we create them, we can modify them using trim, extend, and offset. And that saves us time and allows us to finish our projects in a shorter time. And in this menu, we have other options available. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. Move, copy, rotate. You can move the geometry, copy the geometry, rotate the geometry. And these are commonly used again, but a lot of times people use the shortcuts on their keyboards, and we'll talk about them in the future as well. And we have split, scale, stretch available here as well, and we're going to cover them in the following videos. Thank you.